This podcast includes discussion of rape and sexual assault, abuse, murder, and other criminal behavior. Listener discretion is advised. Susan Urich did not expect what greeted her when she walked through the doors of the America First Credit Union branch where she worked. A dozen long-stem yellow roses in a bud vase sitting on her desk.
They just had a little note on them to a friend, or says, "Thank you for being a friend," or something like that.
What friend would have sent her a dozen roses without so much as signing a name? Susan moved the flowers to her credenza, thinking it must be a mistake. Except it happened again. Another dozen yellow roses arrived a couple of days later, again bearing a card that read, "Thank you for being a friend." She again set the flowers aside.
I mean, they were beautiful flowers, but when you're getting them from somebody that they don't even write their name on the card, it makes you a little nervous.
That feeling only intensified at the end of the week when a third batch of roses arrived. They had come from a place called Gibby Floral. Susan phoned the company and asked who had sent them.
They told me that it was a young kid that came in, paid cash for them, and said, "Send the flowers."
This secret admirer game was not endearing. Some stranger who refused to identify himself was harassing Susan. Her unease soured into outright fear.
Because every day I'd walk out looking around the credit union thinking, what's going to happen?
She told the florist not to accept any more deliveries in her name. But Susan once again received a dozen yellow long-stem roses at the start of the next week. They had come from a different florist, a place called Candlelight, in the nearby city of Layton.
And I called them, and they said the same thing happened. A young kid came in, paid cash for them, and they sent them out, and I told them I wouldn't accept them.
This flood of flowers had to have cost the sender hundreds of dollars. While yellow roses are meant to symbolize friendship, Susan couldn't shake the sense of dread the blooms had brought with them. She wondered if someone might be trying to manipulate her. She did, after all, have access to sensitive financial information. She didn't dare think what other intentions the man who sent the flowers might have.
If you know who it is, if you know the person, and you know a reason, but for any normal person, roses every other day like that is ridiculous. I mean, to me it is.
What kind of guy would blast a woman he didn't know with a barrage of bouquets?
Scared me to death.
This is Cold, Season 2, Episode 1, The Type That Sends Roses. From KSL Podcasts, I'm Dave Cawley. We'll be right back. If you draw a line on a map between the cities of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Winnipeg, Manitoba, then stick your finger in the middle of that line, you'll find yourself pointing at a small college town called Bemidji. George and Hulda Feigl, residents of Bemidji, welcomed their third daughter, Joyce Lynn Feigl, on January 3, 1946. Joyce had two sisters. The oldest, Dorothy, was 19 years Joyce's senior. Edna, the middle child, was also significantly older, graduating from high school the same year as Joyce's birth. The Feigl family lived on a farm on the outskirts of town. The older girls helped their mother raise little Joyce, nicknaming their baby sister Binky, a reference to a popular brand of pacifier. George Feigl worked as a groundskeeper at the Bemidji Town and Country Club, a post he had held for decades. But by the time Joyce was old enough to enroll in school, George was nowhere to be found. As a teen, Joyce met a boy named Mel Roberts.
Well, she's a very attractive girl, for openers.
Mel was a few years older. He was a senior in high school when Joyce was a freshman, and found himself smitten.
She's had a real outgoing personality, friendly, bubbly, happy-go-lucky.
They dated for the better part of a year.
We'd go to football games and basketball games, and we'd follow during the tournaments and whatnot, we'd go watch the high school teams play.
Their relationship took a turn, though, when at age 15, Joyce learned she was pregnant. Hulda Feigl took news of her unmarried teenage daughter's pregnancy hard.
I went out to her house on a Saturday morning and walked in the yard, and she was in the kitchen making a cake, and she worshipped the ground I walked on, and she spun around and left when he speak to me.
The Feigl family tree traced its roots back to Germany and Scandinavia. They had been Lutherans long as anyone could remember.
They went to church religiously every Sunday, and she went through her, the Lutheran confirmation with his 2 years.
Hulda told Joyce she shouldn't raise her baby.
She was going to put her in a Lutheran home and, give the baby up for adoption.
Mel had a different idea. Keep the baby and get married.
Joyce and I sat there and talked for a few hours, and then she finally came in, and we hashed it out.
Mel had by that point started classes at Bemidji State College.
When I found out she was pregnant, I dropped out of college and went and found a job.
Lacking experience or references, Mel went from business to business, knocking on doors, until he ended up at a metal stamping company. The manager invited Mel into his office.
He said, "Do you have a girl pregnant?" And I looked at him like he was on Mars. Well, come to find out, his son was in the same circumstances, similar age to me. And honest to God, I think that's probably why he hired me.
This job interview took place at about 3 p.m. The manager told Mel his shift started at 6.
And I ended up working in that business the rest of my life.
Joyce and Mel married in January of 1962. Joyce gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Kim, about 4 months later. Joyce became a full-time mother at the age of 16. She dropped out of school and moved with her new husband to Minneapolis. A year later, they welcomed a second child, a son named Greg.
Well, you look back on how you survived, and it was pretty amazing. Kids today couldn't do that.
They made friends with their new neighbors, but didn't have much time for socializing. Mel worked nonstop. Joyce's favorite pastime seemed to be sunbathing.
She was a sun goddess. She'd lay in the sun when it was 40 degrees out.
She would even drag the laundry into the yard so she could do the ironing in the sun. Each summer, Joyce would take the kids and spend a week or two visiting her sister Edna in Duluth, on the western tip of Lake Superior.
Edna spent a tremendous amount of time with Kim and Greg when they were little.
Dorothy, Joyce's oldest sibling, had by then moved away to Utah. She and Joyce struggled to stay in touch during this period, relying mostly on letters.
Back then, it wasn't like you had cell phones and whatnot. We didn't come from wealthy families, so long-distance calls back then were expensive.
Long-distance phone calls were not the only luxury they had to forego. Mel and Joyce were in over their heads.
The odds of that succeeding are pretty remote.
Joyce took jobs waitressing in the evenings. She couldn't find better paying gigs, in part because she had never finished high school. The stress of her situation began to feel like a vice. She wanted out. Joyce filed for divorce after just a handful of years.
Had we not been so young, I'm pretty sure the relationship would have been far more successful.
The separation did not solve Joyce's problems. Instead, it brought on a different set of challenges. Money grew even more tight, forcing her to work 2 or 3 jobs at a time.
Unfortunate, she had to work a lot, so the kids spent, some time alone and whatnot, but didn't have any choice.
Dating in her early 20s with 2 young children also proved difficult. She had a few bad experiences with boyfriends that left her, in Mel's words, screwed up.
Struggling financially, and I think she was struggling emotionally as well.
Mel had remained close to Joyce, their children, and even Joyce's mother Hulda, in spite of the divorce. But forces beyond his control soon swept him away. The government drafted Mel into the U.S. Army in 1968. Joyce needed a fresh start. She decided to leave Minnesota, to take her kids Kim and Greg, and head west, following her sister Dorothy's trail to Utah. Monin Lovell had 3 sons. The oldest, 19-year-old Russell, was playing a game with 17-year-old Royce at the family's home in the city of Uinta, Utah. The baby of the family, 14-year-old Doug, watched from the sidelines. Monin interrupted, telling the boys he and their mother had news to share. Doug could tell it was not good.
I remember thinking to myself that they were going to tell us someone in the family died.
That is not Doug's actual voice, but they are his words, taken from a letter written many years later. Tears welled in Monin's eyes. He told his sons he and his wife Shirley were divorcing after nearly 20 years of marriage. Monin saw expressions of shock on the boys' faces.
I never seen my mom or dad fight, and neither had my two older brothers. We were the perfect family, so I thought.
Except they weren't. Royce was beginning to dabble with drugs. Doug had been getting into trouble himself. He had gone to juvenile court a year prior when he was just 13 for theft.
I can still clearly hear my father's voice saying, "You kids need to decide who you want to live with." It was more than I could handle. How dare they make me pick between them?
Monin told his boys he was moving out of the house that very day. Doug bolted to his feet and ran out of the room. It was September of 1972. Russell, the oldest, would soon turn 20 and could live on his own. Royce, it was decided, would follow his father to his new apartment. Doug would remain with his mother Shirley. Doug Lovell had spent his earliest years on a farm, on the fringe of Utah's vast West Desert. Both of his parents were themselves from Oak City.
We had all the animals that belonged on a farm and then some. Animals were the love of my life, and I had lots of them.
The farm life was not to last. Monin had taken a job with the U.S. Air Force, and when Doug was 10, moved his family north to the suburbs of Ogden, near Hill Air Force Base. Doug started finding trouble not long after. He got into schoolyard fights.
I remember back in school when two boys had a problem with each other, they would meet after school and fight. The worst that might happen is a bloody nose or black eye.
And developed a habit for swiping property that did not belong to him. Doug turned 15 in January of '73, days before the courts finalized his parents' divorce. He landed back in juvenile court the following November on criminal counts of theft and burglary. Soon after, at age 16, the courts decided he could answer the same question his brothers had before. Which parent would he choose to live with?
I never could pick. I stayed with Mom, and then I felt guilty for not being with my dad. I always felt whoever I was living with, the other one was thinking that I loved them less.
Monin remarried 2 years after the split from Shirley, to a woman named Dorothy. She brought 7 children of her own to their blended family. Doug bounced back and forth between his parents, until in the summer of '75, he lost the ability to choose. He had dropped out of school and once again run afoul of the law. The juvenile court sent him to the Utah State Industrial School for a 90-day observation and assessment. The industrial school wasn't a prison, but life there was not like home. Doug could not come and go as he pleased. He lived in a dorm with other kids whom the state had also deemed juvenile delinquents. The school's stated aim was rectifying behavioral issues underlying criminal activity in wayward kids, helping them correct their courses before they became adults. That time was fast approaching for Doug. He finished his assessment at the school and turned 18 in January of '76. He moved in with his brother Russell, who was then living in a mobile home in the city of Clearfield. Doug worked menial jobs to pay his way and spent his free time hunting, playing in the mountains, and riding his dirt bike. Joyce arrived in Utah with her school-aged kids Kim and Greg and no safety net. She moved her little family in with her sister Dorothy, who lived in the suburb of Clearfield just west of Hill Air Force Base. Kim remembered her mother and Aunt Dot, as Dorothy was known, being very close.
They would laugh and laugh and laugh. They had so much fun. So much fun.
Joyce soon found work in the nearby city of Ogden. ZCMI, a now-defunct department store chain majority owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, had a few years earlier opened a sprawling branch store at the corner of Ogden's 24th Street and Washington Boulevard. Joyce took a sales position at the ZCMI Cosmetics counter. Greg told me his mother did well at this, no doubt because she looked the part.
She would dress to the nines, and she had a lot of clothes. And working at ZCMI and Bon Marché, she'd put things on hold, and they'd go on sale and further sale and further sale, and she'd end up with these outfits for next to nothing. So
Joyce had developed this sense of frugal fashion very young, inheriting it from her mother. She used it, paired with her gregarious personality, to great effect.
I still have ladies that'll come up to me and tell me that I knew your mother, and, happens all the time.
Securing steady work allowed Joyce to move out of her sister Dorothy's home before long. She found a place not too far away in the neighboring community of Sunset.
The landlord lived in the basement, him and his son, and we lived upstairs.
She also met a man by the name of Joyce Yost. George drove a Buick Electra 225, a car of titanic proportions.
We could swim around the back of there. They'd take us to get ice cream, and just always take a Sunday drive and go look at nice homes and things like that, and go get ice cream at Farr's. Nobody had seatbelts on.
Joyce and George married. This caught Mel Roberts, Joyce's first husband, by surprise.
I don't know what that whole deal was about. Maybe security, I don't know.
The last 10 years or so of Joyce's life had been turbulent, but she seemed to be putting down new roots.
Her and George bought a home together. George Yost bought a home together.
This did not last.
She was married to George Yost for about 3 years, just while we were in kind of elementary school and junior high.
Joyce divorced George after just a few short years, leaving her to once again provide as a single mother. Monan Lovell and his second wife, Dorothy, rose early on the morning of January 6, 1977. They had plans down south in Salt Lake City. They were just on their way out the door when, at about 8:30 a.m., their phone rang. Dorothy answered. A man on the other end of the line identified himself as Officer Parks from the Ogden Police Department. Parks said he needed to speak with Dorothy's then 21-year-old stepson, Royce. Dorothy said Royce was asleep, but given it was the police calling, she decided to wake him. She handed the phone off to Royce, then she and Monan left. They returned about 4 hours later, around noon. When they came through the door of their home, they saw Royce on the floor in a corner of the living room, between the couch and stereo. A small prescription pill bottle containing the psychotropic anti-anxiety medication Librium sat on a nearby table. In a panic, Monan grabbed his son and pulled him into the center of the room, thinking he had just passed out. Royce had not passed out. He was dead. Royce's brothers, Russell and Doug, were working together at the time. Monan called Russell and told him to grab Doug and get home quick. They came through the door and saw Royce's body.
My legs gave out and I found myself crawling to him. As I held my brother's lifeless body in my arms, I remember pleading to him to wake up.
Again, those are Doug's words taken from a letter he wrote years later. Monan and Russell had to drag Doug, then just weeks shy of his 19th birthday, off Royce's body. This demonstration of emotion was notable. Royce and Doug had been at one another's throats constantly as children, but their relationship had deepened as teenagers.
I always seen my brother as being bigger than life. Just being with him, I always felt safe and secure.
Yet, just the day before Royce's death, he and Doug had had a furious fight. It didn't quite come to blows, but it was close.
I remember us standing face to face, shouting at each other. We were so close, I could feel the tiny splashes of spit and the warmth from his mouth.
Doug had expected to take a punch, but Royce had instead walked away. After the fight, neither brother would reveal to the rest of the family just what it had been about.
There was no doubt that I loved him. In fact, my love for Royce was so strong I would have traded my life for his.
The police came. Monin and Dorothy told an officer what had happened, how they had found Royce in a bizarre position in a corner of the room. They mentioned the morning phone call from a man calling himself Parks with the Ogden police. The officer called Ogden PD and asked to speak with Parks, only to be told there was no such person employed with the department. The officer noted something else, a scrap of paper sitting on the floor near the front door. It appeared to be a page out of a paperback book. Printed text on the page read, "Sugar and spice and everything nice, acid and smack, no way back." This was the tagline from a best-selling novel titled Go Ask Alice, written by a woman named Beatrice Sparks. The book was originally marketed as a true account, taken from an anonymous teenage girl's diary, of her slide into addiction and death. Sparks is dead now, but her claim that the manuscript was a true account became a matter of some dispute later in her writing career. Suffice it to say, the book carried a strong anti-drug message and was widely popular in the 70s. How a page of it came to be in the same room as the body of Royce Lovell was not clear. An autopsy would later reveal the presence of IV needle tracks on Royce's arms and legs. Toxicology testing showed the presence not only of Librium, but also Valium and amphetamines in his system. The coroner listed the cause of death as an accidental overdose. Monin had his doubts. He told investigators there were other circumstances surrounding the death that made him believe it was not an accident. Royce's death came just days before he was scheduled to act as a state's witness in a robbery case. At the mortuary, Monin noticed what he thought were bruises on Royce's hands, neck, and across the bridge of his nose. A small ceramic dog figure that typically sat on the fireplace mantel in the same room where Royce had died appeared to have been moved as well, suggesting to Monin someone might have used it as a bludgeon. Police were never able to verify these suspicions, and they closed the case. Joyce had not been divorced from her second husband, George Yost, for long before she became close with another man.
His name was Florin B. Nelson, but he was a big part of her life for
Many years.
Yeah.
Nails, as he was better known, was an Air Force man. He'd been born in 1921 and played football for the University of Utah before joining the U.S. Army Air Corps 6 months after Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Nails ended up piloting the revered P-51 Mustang fighter during the Second World War's waning months, flying combat missions over Europe. All of this before Joyce had even been born. Nails owned a boat. On summer weekends, he and Joyce would take it out on Willard Bay, a freshwater reservoir adjacent to the Great Salt Lake, where they would fish for walleye.
She loved to sunbathe and she loved to go boating with Nails. It was a big part of her life. So
Greg was in the 9th grade when he told his mom he had decided what he wanted to be when he grew up.
I told her and her sister I wanted to be a dentist, and they just thought that was so neat. And we didn't really have any dentists in the family, and I wasn't sure why I exactly chose that, but they made quite a big deal of it, and it kind of maybe made it a bigger goal of mine to have their support.
Mel felt a little more skeptical of his son's plan.
Yeah, I don't know where he ever came up with that. It was nothing I promoted, it was nothing Joyce promoted.
But Greg had his mind set.
It was just something that he wanted to do.
Monin Lovell tried to counsel his wayward son, asking why Doug kept breaking the law. It seemed to Monin that Doug had the mind of a 13-year-old, even though he was approaching 20. His single piece of advice: stop committing crimes. Doug did not listen. He was picked up for possession of a controlled substance in late 1977 and sent to jail for 3 months. Doug went out and stole some lumber around this same time and was charged and convicted of felony theft. In fact, he had 2 separate theft cases going simultaneously in 2 different counties. They each qualified for prison sentences. But the 2 judges, after comparing notes, opted for probation. This was rather remarkable considering Doug's rap sheet. There was a hitch, though. Doug had to serve part of that probation period at the Lake Hills Community Corrections Center, a halfway house in Salt Lake City. There, Doug was to receive training and treatment to help him reform his pattern of bad behavior. Doug had to live at Lake Hills during the week, but was free to hold a daytime job and to spend Saturdays and Sundays off-site, a far less restrictive punishment than prison. He attended a party with a girlfriend in the city of Roy while away from Lake Hills on one such weekend. A young woman he knew, not the girl he was there with, spotted him coming through the door. She stood up. "Lovell, what are you doing?" she asked. "It's been so long." Her name was Rhonda Butters. Doug and Rhonda had first met as kids, when they had shared the same 6th grade class at Club Heights Elementary School. They had never been close, but were acquainted through junior high and high school. That is, right up until Doug had dropped out. Doug and Rhonda started chatting, much to the annoyance of Doug's date. He eventually took that young lady home, then returned to the party to continue flirting with Rhonda. They ended up leaving the party together later that night in Rhonda's Camaro. They bumped into each other again a short time later while attending a funeral for a mutual friend. From this sprang the seed of a relationship. They started dating. Rhonda would drive down to Lake Hills on Friday nights and pick up her new boyfriend. They would go to dinner or the movies before Rhonda would drop Doug off at his dad or brother's place. Then, on Sunday nights, she would return him to the halfway house. This continued until April of '78, when Doug completed his time at Lake Hills and once again became a free man. Closing time was fast approaching at the U-Save Market. The grocery store at the corner of Ogden's 7th Street and Monroe Boulevard typically locked its doors for the day at 8 p.m. Bill Workman, the manager at the store's front end, was in the process of counting the day's receipts when, at 7:52 p.m., 2 men came through the door. One of them, pot-bellied and wearing a plaid flannel shirt unbuttoned down the front, carried a handgun. A nylon stocking obscured his face. The second man, who was thinner, followed a step behind. The lead man pointed the gun at Bill and told him to take them to the safe and open it, which Bill did. The second man then grabbed a pair of cash drawers, which held the bulk of the day's sales. As this was happening, another U-Save employee, named Kelly Sherrod, was closing up her station at the back corner of the building. She wasn't able to hear the commotion up front.
And the store was really quite a large store.
Kelly was 18, fresh out of high school, and working at the U-Save Market 6 nights a week.
That particular day in August, I was working the drive-in window and doing the gas pumps, so.
The drive-up window allowed customers to pull up in their car, ask the clerk there for a few items, then pay without having to step foot inside.
Because what happens is people line up in their car, get their last, gallon of milk or soda or cottage cheese. Can you run across the store and get me some cottage cheese?
Come closing time, it was Kelly's job to shut down her station. That meant going outside to lock a metal grate over the window, to disconnect an air compressor hose, and to record readings on a set of gas pumps located in the parking lot.
I would have to subtract the digits from the day before, and that way they could measure how much gas had been used.
Kelly carried a pen and notebook for this task. She stepped out into an alley behind the store and was startled to see a car parked there.
So the car was there to wait. It was a 4-door Oldsmobile,
along with a man crouched down near the back bumper. The car was parked near the air compressor hose. Kelly thought maybe he was filling a flat tire. Except
He wasn't using the air hose. I popped it off of the building. I rolled it up and set it just on the ground. I didn't take it back in.
many cars built in the 60s had their fuel caps tucked away behind the rear license plate. Kelly next thought the man might be stuffing a rag down the tank's filler pipe.
Yeah, because I thought he had lost his cap.
She had to walk past the car and the man in order to perform her other tasks.
So I said hello to him. He jumped up.
Kelly told me the man acknowledged her with a hello of his own.
I knew he was close to my age just by he had long hair, a very distinct mustache, which I noted. And I noted he had the same color blue eyes as I did. That's how close I was to him.
She continued past him, rounding the northeast corner of the building. She walked out to the gas pumps, then turned around to face back toward the building.
And I was standing at the gas pump, and I noted that that car had kind of pulled out.
Just then, two men came running around the front side of the store off to Kelly's left. They were sprinting. She saw one of them had a handgun.
And these two individuals running down the side of the store took nylon stockings off their heads.
The front-end manager, Bill Workman, wasn't far behind.
He didn't chase them, just to the edge, and he yelled, "We're being robbed." And that just changed my whole thing. You know, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to write down a license plate.
The two men dove into the car before she could do anything of the sort. The heavier guy, the one with the gun, landed in the back seat. He noticed her standing at the gas pumps, staring.
The guy in the back seat told me, "If you know what's good, you'll stand." So I stood.
Tires squealed in a burnout as the young man with the mustache stomped on the accelerator.
And I actually saw the license plate. When they pulled out, I had a notebook. And I thought, I'll just write down the license plate. It was covered. So he was not putting a rag in the gas tank for a missing cap. He was covering the license plate.
The car roared into traffic and disappeared. Kelly scribbled down a few notes about what she had just seen. They proved useful when Ogden police showed up minutes later.
Went out and talked to me about where were you standing and what did you do, kind of reenactment. Wrote a verbal report. Probably spent at least an hour and a half with them talking to us.
Meantime, other officers were tracking down the car. They found it parked outside an apartment 2 miles to the north. Cash and change littered the floorboard, along with a box of .22 caliber ammunition. The officers knocked on the apartment door with their own guns drawn. A man wearing a blue flowered shirt answered and handed over his ID, which bore the name Ray Dodge. Ray was the guy who had grabbed the cash drawers from the U-Save Market's safe. Ray had spent much of his adult life in prison. In the late 60s, he had mounted a legal challenge on behalf of some fellow state prison inmates, resulting in 29 of them going free. There were 2 other people in the apartment with Ray, but neither matched the descriptions of the gunman or getaway driver. The officers interviewed them and determined the driver, the guy with the bushy mustache, was a 20-year-old man named Doug Lovell. Doug had swapped into another car, a '73 Pontiac Grand Am, as soon as he had arrived at the apartment with Ray and the other robber. The officers put out an APB on the Pontiac, and a Utah Highway Patrol trooper found it abandoned behind a car wash a couple hours later. Police wasted no time securing an arrest warrant for Doug. He surrendered the following day. Ogden police soon identified the other robber as Cheryl Chestnut. Like Ray Dodge, Cheryl was a career criminal. He had first gone to prison in the 50s for burglary. Soon after his release in '65, Cheryl had taken a pair of Utah Highway Patrol troopers captive at gunpoint during a traffic stop. How had a young man like Doug Lovell fallen in with these kinds of hardened felons, both of whom were at least 20 years his senior?
He, to me, was a young kid that was doing the wrong thing.
Kelly picked Cheryl, Ray, and Doug from a lineup, and she realized it was not the first time she had seen their faces.
I knew when I picked those guys out of the lineup, I had seen them in the store.
They had cased the store and planned the heist. They had known what time to arrive and where to park the getaway car to avoid being seen. They had made sure to obscure their faces and had accounted for contingencies.
Other than I don't believe they knew what the back window cashier did coming out and that.
Doug could have rolled over on his accomplices, but didn't. It made little difference as Cheryl and Ray were quickly convicted and sent back to prison. Although Doug had only acted as the getaway driver, under the law, he was just as culpable. Prosecutors filed a first-degree felony charge of armed robbery against him. He went to trial in November of '78.
I did get called as a witness to go to court on Doug level.
The prosecutor, Ernie Jones, told Kelly what to expect. Kelly felt a little nervous, but also confident about what she had seen. That confidence only grew on the day of her testimony.
He's cleaned up, he's in a business suit, you know what I mean? But I knew it was him. There was no question.
Doug had supporters in the courtroom, his new girlfriend Rhonda Butters among them. The judge had assigned Doug a public defender by the name of John Kane. John was a young, up-and-coming lawyer who had been admitted to the bar in the fall of '73 and almost immediately gone to work on a major death penalty case, the Ogden Hi-Fi Shop murders. I will have more to say about that in a later episode. Kane's defense proved insufficient. Kelly, the only witness who could place Doug at the scene of the robbery, shared her account with the jury.
I do know that his role was to drive that car.
The 8 jurors found Doug guilty. Utah law set the penalty for the crime of aggravated robbery at no less than 5 years in prison and possibly up to life. But when Doug went back to court for sentencing a couple of weeks later, Judge Ronald Hyde said he would not be sending Doug to prison. He instead enrolled Doug in a course known as the Public Offenders Program at the Utah State Hospital. This was a treatment-focused inpatient program for, quote, emotionally disturbed individuals. The state hospital and asylum operated under the direction of the Utah Division of Mental Health. Doug would have to meet guidelines set by an agency called Adult Probation and Parole, but if he kept out of trouble, he could serve a much abbreviated term at the hospital while retaining many of his personal freedoms, just as he had done at the halfway house and the state institutional school. It didn't work. A parole officer wrote Doug up for failing to abide by the treatment program the following June. Judge Hyde ordered Doug back to court and imposed the original sentence. So on August 8, 1979, almost 1 year since the robbery, Doug found himself reunited with his accomplices Ray Dodge and Cheryl Chestnut as an inmate at the Utah State Prison. Joyce Yost's daughter, Kim Roberts, met a young man through some mutual friends not long after starting classes at Roy High School. His name was Randy Salazar. Randy would at times drop by to visit Kim at her mom's place. That's how he was first introduced to Joyce.
She was a good lady. She was a hard worker. I'll tell you what.
As well as Kim's younger brother, Greg.
I remember we had then lived in like the Herefordshire apartments in Roy.
And even Joyce's boyfriend, Nails, and her sister, Dorothy.
And whenever there was a barbecue, we all got together. Old Dot would be out there with her little drink and her cigarette, and Joyce would be out there too. And we used to have some pretty good times with them people.
Randy was a few years older than Kim. He graduated ahead of her. They stayed in touch, though, and even started dating. That quickly progressed to marriage in 1979. Randy was 20, and Kim was 17.
She loved Randy. Just loved Randy. He's a character.
Kim had married young, just like her mother. Randy, for his part, got along very well with his new mother-in-law.
There's sometimes she gave me some advice, some stern advice, which is good,
Joyce was herself only 33 years old at this point, but she had been through 2 marriages and knew a bit about relationships. She was still dating Nails, who had been married before and had children of his own. Neither Joyce nor Nails seemed in any kind of rush to get married themselves. They had moved in together, though, sharing a condo just west of Weber State University. Greg, who was still in high school, lived with them. Randy sometimes joked to his young bride, if she looked as good as her mother did in her 30s, he would be a lucky man.
She was a very, very, and I'll say beautiful lady. She was always dressed to the max. Her lips were always just red with another 10 on of lipstick. Her hair was always fixed up nice. Her makeup, she was a very, very beautiful lady. She was.
It wasn't just Joyce's physical appearance that impressed Randy.
She was a hard-working, darn good provider.
Not only did Joyce work full-time at ZCMI,
the perfume counter, yep. She used to sell Estee Lauder. And she was pretty darn good at it, too.
She also supplemented her income cocktail waitressing at night.
Elks Club, Blue Monaco's in Roy. What's the name of that one in Riverdale?
Lamplight?
Lamplight.
Joyce would come home from her shift at the club after 1 a.m., knowing she had to rise early the next morning to be back at the cosmetics counter.
She did it so that we had everything that we ever wanted or needed. She made sure of that, but we didn't have a lot of time with her.
Doug Lovell was just 2 days shy of the 1-year anniversary of his arrival at the Utah State Prison when he received his chance to go before the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole on August 6, 1980. The Board of Pardons had, and still has today, broad authority under the Utah Constitution. It's the Board of Pardons, not any judge, that decides how much time somebody who is sent to prison by the state courts really serves. Impress the board, and you can shorten your stay. Board hearings are audio recorded. Those hearings should be retained in state archives. But when I asked the board for a copy of Doug's 1980 parole hearing, I was told it no longer existed. It was just too old. What I can tell you based on other paper records is Doug presented as a model inmate at his hearing. He succeeded in winning over the board members. No one had bothered to ask Kelly, the grocery store clerk whose testimony had helped convict Doug.
No, I was never notified.
And maybe it wouldn't have mattered.
I didn't see him as a threat that particular day, other than, being scared of what was going on.
He'd only been the wheelman. At his trial, Doug had presented as an impressionable kid, pushed into the crime by 2 notorious older felons. Doug had entered a program upon arrival at the prison called First Offenders. It was designed for inmates who were young. The program operated out of the prison's Special Services Dormitory, or SSD, a minimum to medium security section where inmates were afforded more luxuries than in most of the other housing units. Doug had quickly discovered good behavior was advantageous. It allowed him to remain in SSD. The judge had sentenced Doug to a term of 5 years to life. The parole board decided because of his model behavior, he should serve just half of the minimum, 2.5 years. They scheduled his parole date for February 9th, 1982. Kim and Randy Salazar were still establishing themselves when, about a year into their marriage, Kim learned she was pregnant.
I remember Joyce saying, no, this baby's not going to call me Grandma. She says, this baby's going to call me Joyce. And as time went on, and it got closer, I remember she couldn't wait to be called Grandma, Yeah.
Kim gave birth to a daughter, Melissa, in December of 1980. Joyce met her first granddaughter.
So she was a rockin' 34-year-old grandma. She loved it.
Yeah, she did.
She soaked up every minute of it.
Joyce had always gone all out on Christmas.
Oh my gosh. It's an understatement.
There'd be the Christmas tree, and there wouldn't be much carpet left. Because she would shop and shop And any gift she thought about you during the year, it was underneath that tree.
Tradition dictated Joyce take her children over to her sister Dorothy's house each Christmas Eve. The two sisters were known to gab for hours.
You know, when we were little, we'd cry because it was time to go because we were going to miss Santa Claus, and they'd be laughing and carrying on, and we wouldn't be going, and we'd be mad.
As Kim and Greg had grown, they had found themselves more and more a part of the family's traditions.
We'd beg to open one gift, just beg and beg and beg, and then they had a little strategy. You'd always get something
Kind of lame.
baseball glove full of bad cologne or something.
Now that Kim had a baby of her own, born just 2 weeks before Christmas, Joyce shifted her focus to her little granddaughter.
Joyce she bought her so many Christmas presents by the time Christmas was there. It was crazy. And she just loved her. Melissa couldn't open the gifts. So she would open the gifts a little bit and show her like Melissa really didn't care, but Joyce got a lot of enjoyment out of it.
The early 1980s brought some hard years, not only for Joyce, but also for millions of people in the United States. The nation went through back-to-back recessions in 81 and 82. At its worst, the unemployment rate climbed above 10%. Randy found a job in the shops of the Utah Transit Authority. It required he work in Salt Lake City, so he and Kim moved south.
I think it was kind of hard on her because Kim wasn't around a lot. So we tried to come back every weekend.
Greg, meanwhile, had finished high school and enrolled at Utah State University.
I'd come home on the weekends and she'd do my laundry and pack me up with groceries,
Greg's dream of becoming a dentist had dimmed. Mel Roberts told me he had encouraged his son to pursue a different path.
His first quarter was in computer science, and he hated it.
Joyce split up with her longtime boyfriend, Nails, and moved out of their condo. She landed in a small apartment, the bottom left-hand unit of a fourplex on 40th Street in South Ogden.
And she used to lay out in her front yard all the time. And after we had Melissa, she would be on the lawn in the summertime with Melissa and just being a good grandma.
Kim and Randy welcomed a second daughter, Melanie, at the beginning of 1982. Joyce and her sister Dorothy would often make the 2-hour drive to West Wendover, Nevada on the weekends, where they would play the slots. Randy remembered once running into her there while he was visiting Wendover with his own parents.
She told me, you ought to just play a dollar machine instead of those dime and nickel machines. And I said, I don't know. I said, man, I haven't got the money. Just try it. So I did it. And I hit $100, just right away. Just right after that, I hit another $100. And Joyce was kind of laughing at me and saying, see, you can do it.
Joyce even slipped away to Wendover by herself on occasion. She didn't always bother to tell Kim or Greg about those impromptu trips.
So she'd call her all weekend, and then Kim would worry about her, and I'd say, Kim, she's all right. That's your mom. You know your mom.
Greg decided to switch schools after finishing his first year at Utah State. He transferred to Weber State College, which sat just east of Joyce's apartment. She had a spare bedroom and invited her son to move in, which he did. Rhonda Butters had not waited for Doug Lovell after he went to prison in 1979. She had soon married a different man named Richard Ryan Scullin. They had had a baby in 81, a little girl they had named Alicia. Their relationship had proven rocky, though. Rhonda felt unhappy, and by 82 was considering divorce. This was a daunting proposition. Rhonda thought about separating from her husband and moving back home with her own parents. But while visiting them one day, she received a phone call from Doug. The Utah Board of Pardons and Parole had let Doug out even earlier than planned. He had left prison in January of 82 and rented an apartment at a place called Pepper Ridge in Clearfield. His finances were in shambles. Upon his release, Doug's parents had connected him with an employee at their credit union, a woman named Susan Urich.
I first met Doug when I was collection officer in the collection department, and I was collecting on a loan that he'd had prior to going to prison.
Susan was 10 years older than Doug. He seemed like a child to her.
Young kid, sandy blonde hair, bushy mustache, slight frame.
And she did what she could to help him sort out the mess he had made.
It's like you're telling him, look, you got to clean up your life, you know. I mean, it wasn't like me talking to another adult. It was like me talking to a kid, reestablishing his credit and pulling his life around.
Part of Doug's post-prison plan involved rekindling his romance with Rhonda. On this phone call in early '82, Doug told Rhonda she should forget about moving back with her parents and instead move in with him at his new apartment. Rhonda vacillated. Her attorney had told her the divorce would go more smoothly if she wasn't cohabiting with another man. "You're so wishy-washy," Doug had said. "I wish you would just make up your mind." Rhonda did eventually choose to move in with Doug at the Pepper Ridge Apartments. She brought her daughter Alicia with her, but soon found this led to problems. Doug told Rhonda when he looked at Alicia, all he could see was her estranged husband. Rhonda told her friends Doug scared her. They argued a lot. She would take Alicia and leave when their fights became heated, sometimes for a day, sometimes for a week. But he always lured her back. Late on the evening of January 14th, 1983, Doug, Rhonda, and Alicia were together in that little apartment watching TV when they heard a pounding at the door. Doug leapt up as the door jamb splintered around the deadbolt. A final thump sounded, and the door swung inward, revealing a man standing on the threshold. Rhonda's husband. Doug and Rhonda's extramarital relationship was not a secret to Ryan Scullin. But according to police reports, he had had a few drinks that night and decided to confront them about it. They grappled, rolling out of the apartment into the parking lot. Clearfield police, responding to reports of a domestic dispute, arrived minutes later to separate the two men. They arrested Ryan on suspicion of burglary, disturbing the peace, and assault on a police officer. Official reports listed Doug Lovell as the victim. Later that same year, Doug and Rhonda moved out of his little apartment. They upsized, renting a little house near the border of Clearfield and the neighboring city of Sunset. They had been there just a few months when, in October of '83, Rhonda went into Clearfield Police Headquarters. She told an officer Doug had told her he intended to kill her ex-husband. She took the threat seriously because of their fight back in January, as well as Doug's criminal history. According to a police report, Rhonda explained she had moved out of Doug's house and back in with her ex. The officer warned Rhonda it could prove difficult securing a restraining order due to the different jurisdictions. They arranged to talk with the city attorney about that issue the next day. That meeting never happened. The officer called Rhonda a little while later to find out why. She told him she had changed her mind. She no longer believed Doug was a threat, or that he intended to kill her ex. Police closed the case as unfounded. Rhonda's reunion with Ryan Scullin didn't last long. Doug Lovell lured her back. On January 22, 1984, Doug and Rhonda married in Elko, Nevada. Kim Salazar delivered her third child, a son named Michael, just days after Christmas in 1983. Joyce Yost now had 3 grandchildren.
Oh man, that just made her whole world. She was so excited.
Her first grandchild, Melissa, was growing old enough to accompany Grandma Joyce on trips into downtown Ogden.
She had got her one of those little furry muff things for your hands because ladies didn't put their hands in their pockets, and just always trying to make her be just right.
Joyce had become good friends over the years with a man named Gordon Kaufman and his wife Terry.
They'd go to lunch at the Tiffin Room at ZCMI, and they just all became real tight friends.
Gordon was a fixture of the downtown Ogden business community. He had managed a Morgan Jewelers location near Joyce's work for 20 years before opening his own store. Joyce sometimes took Melissa there to show her off.
She said she remembers the big chandelier when you'd walk into the jewelry store, and she knew better than to touch anything in there.
The Kaufmans weren't the only people to whom Joyce expressed pride over her grandkids.
And one of my favorite photos is that picture of Mom holding Melissa.
At the parade.
Downtown Ogden. And
She used to drive her
the
convertible
Ogden
car.
temple is in the background, and she's just glowing with holding Melissa in her arms.
Joyce owned a 1976 Oldsmobile Delta 88 convertible.
She used to drive around town with that car that probably weighed, oh hell, I don't know how much it weighed, but it probably only got like 5 miles to the gallon.
Sometimes the top wouldn't work, and she wasn't going to be late for work. She would literally drive that car with the top down in the rain, holding an umbrella. She was crazy. She did some funny stuff.
These kinds of little setbacks were nothing compared to the blow that landed on Joyce when ZCMI informed her the company was terminating her employment after 12 years of faithful service.
You know, she always thought that was why they let her go, was just because she was about to be eligible for their retirement plan.
A more bittersweet heartbreak came in the summer of '84. Her son Greg had completed his undergraduate studies and was accepted into dental school, out of state.
I'll tell you what, she was so proud of him.
Greg packed his things into a little U-Haul trailer, which he hitched to the back of his Honda Accord, for the 2,100-mile drive to the Medical College of Virginia in Richmond.
I just remember pulling away from her,
Joyce and Greg had always been close, but they had grown especially so during those 2 years he had spent living with her while in college.
After he left, I think she was a little lonely, those two were like buddies.
She filled that void best as she could by deepening her social life. Joyce dated several men, none of them seriously, and found a new job working for the wine stocks department store in the Fashion Place Mall, 40 miles south in the city of Murray. Doug Lovell went to the Ogden, Maine branch of America First Credit Union on Saturday, January 26, 1985, with his wife Rhonda and her then 3-year-old daughter Alicia. He was there to secure financing on a car, and he knew just the person to see, Susan Urich. Doug told Susan he wanted to buy the car from a dealership in town called Lincoln Auto.
It was a red RX-7.
This audio, I should mention, as well as the earlier bits from Susan in this episode, came from a later police interview recording. Susan knew cars from Lincoln Auto were sometimes problematic. Lincoln dealt with a lot of wrecked and salvaged vehicles.
And I went out and looked at the car and inspected it to make sure that the car existed and the serial number matched.
Doug, Rhonda, and Rhonda's little daughter Alicia followed Susan into the parking lot. Susan could see the car was all there. A small, sporty Mazda coupe with flip-up headlights.
And he just talked about how excited he was about having the car.
The car wasn't the most practical choice for a family, but Doug didn't mind. He could afford it, as well as the home he was renting, thanks to a job he had secured with the help of his father. His dad had pulled strings to land Doug a gig driving a cement truck. Susan determined the Mazda was in good shape.
I booked out the vehicle for $9,400, and he only needs $7,000 to purchase it.
The credit union cut Doug a check for $7,000. But his name wasn't the only one on the pay to the order of line. Below it was the name Marvin Flukiger. I'll come back to Marvin in a later episode. For now, just know the calendar turned from January to February. Doug arrived at the credit union with his paycheck. He strolled into the lobby, made his deposit, and applied some of the money toward the car loan. While there, he dropped by Susan's desk and noted the huge array of yellow roses arranged on her credenza. "Oh, I see you got the flowers," Doug said. Realization dawned on Susan just who her secret friend was.
Well, he told me he was the one that sent them. And I told him it was ridiculous, that he had a family. It was stupid for him to be spending his money like that.
A small thank you gift was one thing, But 2 straight weeks of roses every other day was over the top. It had freaked her out. Susan told Doug she had a mind to call his parents and tell them what he had done.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he knew about it. I mean, I could have wrung his neck for it.
Doug seemed crushed, as though he didn't understand why Susan hadn't seen the flowers as the nice gesture he had intended.
But I let him have it from one end to the other. In first place, why he's extending money, and that was stupid to be doing that, and that he scared the living bejesus out of me.
Little did she know, Doug was about to do something far worse. Rays of sunlight scattered across the waters of the Great Salt Lake's Farmington Bay. A little to the east, a big boat of a car pulled into a parking stall outside of a strip mall in the city of Clearfield. Joyce Yost stepped out of her convertible and headed for the door of a supper club called the Pier 3. It was midweek, a Wednesday evening, and she was stopping off on her way home from work to meet a friend.
A gentleman friend at the Pier 3 at approximately 7 o'clock for dinner.
That's Joyce's own voice, from one of the only known recordings of her, describing what happened on this night of April 3rd, 1985. This season will include a lot of rough audio like this, from old analog tapes. Some were made under less than ideal circumstances. Others are second or third generation copies that have degraded over time. I've done my best to clean them up. Back to the story. Joyce and her friend, a man named Lex Baer, spent the better part of 3 hours that April evening at the pier.
We had a couple of drinks, and we had dinner, and we danced a couple of times.
Lex was 62 years old, to Joyce's 39. The age gap didn't bother her. Many of her closest friends were older, including her sister Dorothy, as well as Gordon and Terry Kaufman. And Joyce had dated older men before, like her ex-boyfriend, Nails. As the evening waned, Joyce and Lex prepared to leave. They walked out of the Pier 3 together at about 10:15.
And the gentleman I was with had his own vehicle, and I had my own vehicle. And he walked me to my car. In fact, he gave me a kiss at my car, said goodnight.
She pulled out of the parking lot and headed for South Ogden. She went from stoplight to stoplight, her mind on the events of the day and on the social outing she had just enjoyed.
Not realizing anybody was following me, not really paying any attention to see if anybody was following me.
Somebody was following her. A little red Mazda with flip-up headlights bobbed in the rear view. If you or someone you know has endured rape, sexual assault, or sexual abuse of any kind, help is available. In the United States, you can call 1-800-656-HOPE or visit rainn.org to connect with free resources through the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. No one needs suffer in silence. You are not alone. If you haven't already, please subscribe to or follow Cold to make sure you get every episode. You can also interact with me and the Cold team on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Cold Podcast. Cold is researched and written by Dave Cawley, with editorial oversight by executive producer Cheryl Worsley. Additional executive producers include Paul Anderson, Nick Piniella, and Andrew Greenwood. Audio production by Nina Ernest. Mixing by Trent Sell. Michael Bonmiller composed the main score. Special thanks to the team at Amazon Music. Full credits for each episode are available at thecoldpodcast.com. Cold is an Amazon original by KSL Podcasts in association with Workhouse Media. Thank you for listening.